to get us underway. There are 21 attendees in addition to the 7 people who are presenting this evening, of whom I'm one. I'm Jeff Leeper. I'm the city councillor. As I look over the list of names, I recognize obviously many of you. And we're here to take a look tonight at the 4-story multi-residential building that's been proposed for 1806 Scott, which is at the corner of Rockhurst. I did just want to say I've received some correspondence on this one. I just wanted to set out at the beginning that I'm likely to be the bad guy on this one tonight. The correspondence that I've received a few notes in opposition to this one, and even if I were not supportive of this, even if I were wanted to oppose it, there are not a lot of planning grounds upon which I'd be able to do so as a city councillor. And I just wanted to set out that expectation right at the start that what I'm probably going to be looking on at this one as is where are the tweaks that can be made to this proposal to try to mitigate the impact on the immediate neighbors. But otherwise, I think it's important to note that our new official plan does call for buildings that are as tall as 9 stories in the on streets that are like Scott Street in this especially close proximity to transit. And the parking rules that are in place here with respect to the number of parking spots required are very deliberate on the part of City Council. We have overarching policies on which we voted with eyes wide open, knowing that units are going to go in places like this that don't have a parking spot associated with them. And again, that's a very deliberate choice on the part of City Council. So for my own part, and of course residents should feel free to weigh in with whatever comments they wish and think are important. But from my end, what I'll be looking for is where are the opportunities to sort of mitigate the impact of this building on the immediate neighbors, because the overall concept, a 4-story multi-residential building at a location like this falls well within what Ottawa's official plan contemplates. So I wanted to be transparent with that at the start. And I'll turn it over to one of my planning assistants, Alice Fife, who will take us from here.
Hi, everyone, and thanks for joining us tonight. I'm just going to start us off with a few housekeeping notes. First of all, the presentation is going to be recorded and it will be posted on the Kitchissippi Ward YouTube, hopefully by the end of this week. And anyone that can't make it will be able to review this recording, or if you are here and you'd like to look at it after, you can feel free to go to YouTube and look at it. And anyone interested and any follow-up questions or anything like that can write to our office for a link after. And you can also just search Kitchissippi Ward on YouTube to find it directly. Also, of course, if you aren't comfortable with being recorded on video, just please feel free to turn off your camera. And you can do that at the bottom left hand of your screen. And we will also take written questions to those who prefer to pass them on that way. Seeing as we're a smaller group tonight, we're going to be taking verbal questions from folks in attendance if they wish to speak. We would ask that you use the raise hand function on Zoom to indicate that you'd like to ask a question. And we will keep a speakers list as we see hands go up. Just to note as well, anyone who prefer not to ask a question verbally may still ask a question directly using the chat or through the Q&A function. Just to go over the format of the meeting, the applicants are here and they're going to offer a short presentation on the proposed development application. And after this, the rest of the meeting will be in a Q&A format. The lead planner on the file, John Bernier, is also in attendance. And yeah, with that, I will hand things over to the applicant team, Fotan and Christopher, the architect, for their presentation. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Alice. So from the applicant team, I'm joined here. So my name's Tamara Nahal. I'm from Fotan. I'm a planner, and I'm also joined here by my colleague, Lisa Dalla Rosa. And I also have Chris Benes. He's the architect on this project. So I'm going to walk through the presentation. I'll turn it over to Chris in a moment. Oh, let me jump to the agenda. This is an even better slide. Let me see if my computer will let me. There we go. So we've had the introduction from Councillor Leeper and his office. I'll go through the site context and planning and regulatory framework. After that, I'll turn it over to Chris to go over the architecture, and then I'll have another slide just outlining the zoning bylaw application that we've submitted. We also have a project timeline to help folks see where we are in the process, and then we'll get into the question and answer. So this project is for 1806 Scott Street. It's for a 4-story low-rise apartment building. And we are proposing 16 units. And the current applications that have been submitted are the zoning bylaw amendment and the site plan control application. So I'll dive into the site context. The screen shows the site location highlighted with a blue pin drop, and this is shown in sort of a zoomed out context. So 1806 Scott Street's shown sort of in the middle of your screen. It's located in the Wellington Village neighborhood. It's on the northern edge of the surrounding neighborhood and fronts onto both Scott Street and Rockhurst Road. The site is within 800 meters of Westboro Station, which is under construction currently, as well as Tunney's Pasture LRT station, which is open currently. And zooming in a little bit, so we can see the site's location at that intersection of Rockhurst Road and Scott Street. It's at the northern edge of a surrounding residential community. So the nearby neighborhood is characterized by a mix of 1- and 2-story single detached dwellings, row houses, and a few low-rise apartment buildings. And then Scott Street's a little bit different. That neighborhood's sort of transforming in the way that Councillor Leeper mentioned earlier, with some heights slowly being added as development applications come through, or in the pipeline at this point, really. So in addition to its location between 2 LRT stations, there's also multiple bus routes within an even shorter walk. There's 2 frequent routes and 3 local routes. That's the OC Transpo sort of lingo for their frequency. So those frequent routes provide that 15-minute service, and then the local routes provide those connections to LRT, and I've shown them on the screen here. And we can kind of see how this site's pretty well located in terms of walkability to Wellington West, as well as transit and further north to the river. So this is the site as it is currently. This site shows the site looking south on Scott Street. So it's currently occupied by a 2-story detached building that has 2 additions. You can see the first one on the right here. There's currently 4 rental units in the building. And there's a few parking spots on both sides of the street. We've got about 2, 3 maybe on Scott Street, and then about 3 on Rockhurst Road, so very wide parking area currently. This is looking west from Rockhurst Road, so we've got the 2-story portion and then that little 1-story addition to the south. And then you might also notice there's a little hydro wire running over the sort of east side of the property, running north-south there, which will come into factor later when we go through the architecture. With regard to the planning and regulatory framework, the site is located in the inner urban transect in the City of Ottawa's official plan that was approved in 2022. So it's right on that Main Street corridor on Scott Street, and the surrounding neighborhood is also identified as identified as neighborhood, and it also has an evolving neighborhood overlay. So the inner urban transect, just to walk through each of these one by one, because there's a lot going on. The inner urban transect, that's generally planned for mid to high-rise density development. It's intended to develop as mixed use, with Main Street corridors providing that range of services, retail, commercial, service sort of oriented businesses. The goal being you should be able to walk to those areas and get everything you need within 15 minutes. A maximum height of 40 stories can be permitted on Main Street corridors, but that really depends on road width and transition. So for sites that front onto streets with where the road is less than 30 meters, up to 9 stories of height are generally permitted, and Scott Street falls right into that category. The width of Scott Street really determines the height that the official plan is looking for this Main Street corridor. So 9 stories is sort of the maximum that the official plan envisions, subject to that transition. So we'll see this a bit more, but the site is currently being proposed for a 4-story building, so that's well under the maximum 9. And Councillor Leeper kind of alluded to that a little bit in the beginning, so thanks for that intro. The greater neighborhood to the south, we've got that evolving neighborhood overlay. That's kind of a little purpley checkboxes all over, little purple streaks all over the properties. So what that means is it affects sites close to hubs and corridors. It signals a gradual evolution over time where the city is looking to support intensification, and they expect to see a change in character. So I think we could think of this as part of that changing character. Because this is a 4-story building being proposed on the edge of a neighborhood with a lot of 2-story buildings, this is sort of that transition. So that's the official plan. Now on the right-hand screen, the right-hand portion of the screen, we've got the zoning bylaw map. So the site's again marked with that blue pin, and it's currently zoned residential first density subzone MM, so that's the R1 MM on the screen, and we're proposing to rezone the site to residential 4th density in the UD subzone, so R4 UD. And we use the R4 UD zone to guide the design of the low-rise apartment building. And based on the initial concept, we're looking at a couple amendments to that subzone, just because there were a lot of adjustments we had to make to really make the development cohesive and really beneficial for the future residents. And I'll get into that a little bit later after Chris goes through the architecture, which is now that time. So I'll pass it off to Chris.
Perfect. Thank you, Tamara. Yeah, so this is the site plan. You know, it's quite a small building. It's only a few thousand square feet in floor plate. And yet we managed to provide quite a variety of unit types over the 4 levels plus basement. So we've got everything from bachelors up to 2 bedrooms. And even, you know, within the different typologies, you know, we have some variety there too to offer choice. So for instance, on the 3rd and 4th floor, we've got some relatively small 2 bedrooms that would rent for a little bit less money. And on the basement and 1st level, we have, you know, quite a comfortable 2 bedroom as well. So lots of choice in this building, lots of opportunity to rent to various family types. Half of our units are in fact barrier free, so 8 out of the 16, which is well above what's required by code. But again, it accommodates you know, more options for folks that might be seeking to live here. I know that one of the, if we could move to the next slide, actually, please. Thank you. So you're seeing the basement plan on the left and the ground floor on the right. What I wanted to mention at the outset is the waste room was originally looked at as being something that would be at the back of the property in a separate building. And we got some feedback from the city during our pre-consult, and they asked, you know, could we internalize it? And could we also find space for bicycles inside? So we've been able to do that. The plan is about as efficient as it can be, accommodating, you know, circulation, an elevator, of course, for this height of building. And we were able to get all of our waste needs supported on the top left of the ground floor plan. You will see. Thank you. Yeah. And you know, it opens directly out at street level, so it's a very convenient and easy access for waste collection and storage. Nobody will be seeing it, which is nice. And also towards the center of the right-hand side of the same plan. So that's the main entrance. It's labeled, as you can see. And just off of it is the bicycle room. So there's secure storage in there. There would be 10 bicycles stacked, and then an additional 6 on the exterior for a total of 16. So there's 1 bike per unit. Because we understand, you know, there's only going to be 2 parking spaces in this building, and it's a walkable community, and there's lots of opportunity to access transit nearby, but it's just one other way that we can improve the design. Next slide, please. So these are the upper floors. The 3rd floor is exhibited on the right, and I believe the 3rd and 4th, yes, are identical, and the 2nd floor is unique. So there's, as you can see, you know, different unit types. Next slide, please. So these are some of the vignettes that illustrate how this is going to sit in context. In terms of the architecture, you know, we tried to provide some amenity space where possible with balconies. We've avoided putting a great deal of them on the west side. If we could move ahead, perhaps it's the next slide, I'm not sure. Okay, this is good. So this is a view of the southeast corner. So you see some of the balconies backing onto the what I would call the rear yard. It's technically a side yard, but in any event, you know, there's more of a setback there, and we've got quite a comfortable setback as well from Rockhurst here, which is a vantage point in this picture, to the east facade of the building. As Tamara mentioned, that was the result of hydro line setbacks. So we're quite set back there. It's allowed us to provide a little bit more landscaping, locate our bicycles and that sort of thing. So we're taking advantage of that. Next slide, please. All right, so those are the 2D elevations. Yes, you can see that there aren't any balconies on the west facade and very few openings, in fact. So the overlook situation to the next property is quite minimal. And is there another slide? I don't think. Okay, so that's it for me. You know, it's a small intervention. I mean, yes, it's 4 stories, but you know, relatively speaking, it's a pretty small project. So, you know, not that much more to say, I think. Architecturally, the facade, we tried to do something that is warm with, you know, the wood tones and make it a little bit playful. So, you know, things aren't just always the same, but yeah, I will leave it there. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Chris and Tamara. John Bernay, the city planner, he also has a few words to say. So before we open it to the residents, we'll let John speak.
Sure. Maybe I'll just finish up there's a few more slides. Yeah,
Oh,
sorry
sure.
about that.
Sorry, Tamara.
No worries.
My apologies.
I've got just a few more, and then I can hand it over to John.
Okay.
Thanks,
Thank
John.
you.
Thanks, Alice. So I'll just walk through so I've got the landscape plan, and then a slide that shows the unit mix, because everyone's always that's always a top question, and then also the zoning bylaw amendments, and a quick timeline. So those are the next few to come up, and then I'll pass it off to John. So yeah, the current slide shows the landscape plan, and so just a few quick details on the current site. Currently there's 2 trees on the property, and then there's one straddling the property line at the southwest corner. You can see it at the bottom left. It's a circle with a little square around it. So all the ones that are identified as a circle with the square, those are the existing trees. We've tried really hard to keep all of them. We had a few deep conversations with the landscape team, asking them if they'll survive construction, and they think that with the right protection they will. So some really good news is we're going to work really hard to preserve all 3 trees, and then as well, 3 trees are proposed to be planted along Scott Street, and then 3 smaller ones on Rockhurst. So the ones on Scott Street are going to be a bit bigger, and that's because the hydro wire on Rockhurst really makes it tough to grow tall trees, or we try to avoid that. We try to keep them less than 6 meters in height to avoid conflicts with the overhead hydro wire. And then we've got some shrubs and plantings and grasses throughout the landscape plan. So closer to the building, we've got a few shrubs. And then we've got a bit of an open lawn character in the rear yard for future residents to enjoy. So we've got 16 units proposed. 56% of them are bachelor units. About 20%, 19% are 1 bedroom or 1+ den. And then 25% are 2 bedroom units. Out of those, we've got 8 accessible units. I know that I said I have 12 on the screen, but Chris corrected me earlier in this presentation. We have as well, we have 16 bicycle parking spaces, 10 are indoor in that bicycle room, and then 6 are outdoor. And that's in the right next to the front door. So everything's very central. And those are the key, yeah, oh, and 2 parking spaces, of course. So those are the key site stats. And the zoning bylaw amendments. So there are 5, we're looking for 4 amendments to the zoning bylaw, plus the rezoning to the R4UD zone. So the first part of the zoning bylaw amendment is to rezone it from R1MM to R4UD. That's just because R1 doesn't permit low-rise apartments, so we have to rezone it to a subzone that does. So out of the modifications that we're proposing to the subzone, I'm going to go through them hopefully quickly. So one of them is the reduced rear yard setback. So we're proposing 3 meters when 4 meters is required. A lot of this really comes down to the way the zoning bylaw defines the front yard. So because the front yard is defined as Rockhurst Road, some of the ways that we apply it to the site look a little odd, so we have to seek relief from it. So the zoning bylaw defines Rockhurst Road as the front yard, which would make that orange line the rear yard, but because of the shape of the site, it doesn't really feel like a rear yard. So when we were designing the site, when Chris was designing this, it became pretty clear that the backyard made more sense to be to the south. And so that's why we're reducing the rear yard in the west, because the west property line is the rear yard. And then the next one's also stemming from that front yard, corner side yard definition. We have to provide an interior yard area, and I've shown the way that the city measures it in the zoning bylaw. We've reoriented it. We've kind of just turned it on its side so that it's south of the building. And we think this makes just a really nice product. It makes a really nice amenity yard for the residents to enjoy, and we can work with the landscape team to make a really nice backyard environment. And then the other one is there's some provisions in the zoning bylaw related to windows. They're based on the front yard and corner side yard again, because we're orienting the building a bit differently. We meet the minimum number, 15% and 25%. We actually provide a few more windows on Rockhurst than we would otherwise. So net benefit. And the last one is there's a zoning bylaw provision about reseating the front facade. So they kind of want to step back and step forward. Because our front yard is Rockhurst Road, we've got that hydro wire. It's a straight wall, but that's usually because they want that step back in the zoning bylaw for interest. We think we've been able to provide a pretty interesting building. So even though we don't have these pushes and pulls, we're still creating a really nice product. So a lot of our zoning bylaw amendment provisions are just trying to really finesse it. And this is the timeline. This is where we are versus where we're going. So we made our first submission in January of this year. And if all goes well, we'll be at Planning and Housing Committee following our resubmissions. And then we would proceed to council, and that usually happens in the same month, but this is just sort of the anticipated future timelines. So on the top is the blue line, that's our applicant timelines, and then the bottom is sort of the back of the work that the city would do when they receive our submission. All right, that's it for me.
All right, thanks so much, Tamara. I'll just share my screen. I got a little bit more on that timeline and process aspect. Let's see here. Okay. Can everyone see that? Good?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. All right. Okay, thanks so much. So yeah, my name is John Bernier. I'm with the Planning, Real Estate and Economic Development Department, and I'm a planner. As you may be aware, we're currently involved in the site plan control and zoning bylaw amendment application process, as previously explained. And so I've been sort of asked to explain the process, which includes a series of steps that I'll go through. So the first series, first, our team receives a zoning bylaw amendment application and site plan control application from the developer. My primary responsibility is to coordinate the circulation and review the application. So next, I verify that the application contains all necessary plans and studies, which will enable us to conduct a thorough review. So if the application is complete, I proceed to prepare the application for circulation. The third item there, so before circulating, I actually provide advance notice to the registered community groups, some of which are here, and the ward councillor, who's also here today. And this is a proactive communication, which ensures they are well informed when residents approach them with inquiries. So we do display an on-site sign, and I upload all of the relevant material to our development applications website, also known as DevApps for public access. So pretty much everything that we received is posted to that page for your viewing. And I understand that some of that material is technical in nature, and I'd be happy to help you go through any of that if you have any questions. So as I'm not an expert in every discipline required for reviewing such a project, I circulate the application to various technical agencies. And just to name a few, fire services, police, parks, conservation authority, forestry services. We have an urban designer on the team as well. And I have a project manager or engineer also reviewing the application, among others. So this enables us to better identify potential issues with the project and start to identify them. So following the circulation, we do compile comments that we've received, including your comments. And although there is a submission deadline, which is now passed, we do continue accepting and incorporating the comments into the file and right up until the decision is actually made. But I will stress that the sooner you send me those comments, the sooner that we could start to address them and try to come up with a compromise. So we're currently in this red square here. The community information session is essentially an optional step that is requested by the ward councillor, excuse me, which offers the applicant team an opportunity to present their proposal, which they have. And this session also helps us explain the planning process and gather valuable feedback from the community. So I will be taking notes tonight, but I do encourage you to reach out to me directly via email if you haven't already. So once I get these comments, we work to address and resolve the identified issues. The site plan component is an iterative process involving multiple revisions to the plan. So as the proposal evolves, each of these submissions are posted to DevApps again for your viewing, and you could comment throughout the entire process. So once all issues have been resolved and the project is in essentially like an approvable state, then I begin drafting my zoning report, which provides a rationale for my recommendations. It also includes a component with all of the a summary of all the comments that we've received from the community, and I address each of those summarized comments. So the Director of Planning reviews my report before it advances to the Planning and Housing Committee. All parties who have provided comment during the process, so yourselves, if you've provided comment throughout the process, then you're notified 10 days prior to the public meeting. And at the Planning and Housing Committee meeting, the file is reviewed, public delegations are heard, and a recommendation is made by the committee. So then that recommendation is then sent off to council for final approval, after which a notice of decision is sent out to all participants, which would initiate a 20-day appeal period. And you do have a right to, if you've participated, to appeal. And if no appeals are filed, I prepare my site plan report, which includes recommendations and a list of conditions that the owner must fulfill. And that essentially ensures that everything that we've negotiated throughout this entire process is fulfilled, and that they build what we agreed upon. So then we continue on with the site plan process. Once the zoning is in place, it is approved by my manager through delegated authority, and then a final decision is rendered, and everyone who participated in the process is notified. But at this point, there is no appeal process for site plans. So the appeal component is actually related to the zoning bylaw amendment. So as mentioned, we did receive quite a few studies to support this application. And these are all of the plans and reports, at least I think I included all of them, that are posted on DevApps, and that my team and my broader team has reviewed or in the process of reviewing. So, and as I'd mentioned, that if you have any questions or need help interpreting any of these various studies and plans, this is what I'm here for, and I'd be happy to help you. So I'll put my contact information in the chat, but I'll also mention it now for those listening. So it's John, JOHN .Bernier, so BERNIER @ottawa.ca. And that's it for me.
Thank you, John and Tamara and Chris. With that, I think we will open things up to questions. Yeah, one sec. Okay. Okay, Heather, I see your hand up.
Hi.
Hi.
I might as well get started here.
Thank you.
First, the good stuff. Sorry, I like the design, and I'm very happy to see the large number of accessible units, because that's something that is lacking in so many new buildings. And the design regarding the green space and the new trees, and the fact that you plan to put big trees in the front, and I have some suggestions for species if anybody wants them, because you have to be sure that they're going to survive. Those are good things. So I guess the only thing with the trees is I would really like to challenge the builder directly to make sure they survive, because I've seen too many places where the design looks quite lovely, and then you see the end result when there's either some poor spindly shrubs or a couple of trees surrounded by a sea of concrete. One up the street planted spindly shrubs, then it exchanged them for ginkgos, and ginkgos that survived the asteroid that killed the dinosaurs are all dead now. So this should not happen. I would really like a commitment that the green space will go in as is, the trees will be protected as required, and that the new trees will thrive. Because with climate change, we absolutely need those trees. We need them for health as well. So that's pretty important. Okay, my questions pertain to the breakdown of the internal units. So if we are going to achieve the OP what they're hoping is to provide some missing middle housing. And here, sorry, I've got a bad throat today. I see 9 bachelor apartments. And when I see bachelor apartments, I see apartments that people will be transiting through. I don't see people living there long term. You'll have maybe longer term people in the 2 bedrooms, and in the larger 1 bedrooms, there's at least a bit of room there for kids. But I don't see 9 bachelor apartments as being a good family option. So my suggestion or question would be, is there any way to change some of that so that some of those bachelors are reconfigured to be a 3-bedroom apartment, for instance? Can that be done? Is it too late? That would be ideal, I think. And the other thing is the location of most of the bachelors seems to be on the south side of the building, facing the community. And if I were going to design this, I would put them on the front facing the street where they're not going to be near anybody, because bachelor apartments, maybe students, maybe short-term, going to be there a year or whatever, but not people who are going to be engaged in the community, and they're not going to be necessarily interested in being quiet on their balconies either. So that would have been something that I think would have been a sort of a better configuration, to put the bachelors more or less toward the front, toward the Scott Street, and then they might be noisy. I'm on the other side on Champlain Park, maybe I'll hear them, but the people directly behind them won't hear them. And sort of change this so that we do have some space for a family with, you know, a couple of bedrooms for kids. So that's the way I look at it. Other than that, the design is quite lovely. I think it will fit quite well, but just some of this interior could be, if it could be shuffled, would be great. So thank you.
Thank you, Heather. Did Tamara or Chris, do you want to speak to Heather's comments or questions?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Thanks for the comment. You know, it's always a challenge. I mean, I can understand your point. And, you know, certainly it's something that could be done, but ultimately it comes down to a client decision in terms of how many bedrooms and how many units would make the project work for their business plan. So certainly we can come back to them and revisit that and see if they'd be willing to expand a unit. But I just can't promise it. But I take your point.
Yeah, and I can add a little bit onto that as well. So to expand a little bit, the developers, the owners are looking to really target market rate rentals with this building. So they're not looking to do a luxury apartment building. And one of the ways that I see in my work a lot is the way we get to market affordability is by creating a mix of units, and often the bachelor apartments, the pricing for those are cheaper, so you are able to attract folks who can't afford an expensive unit. So a lot of the times that unit mix is really trying to target the demographic that is looking for a market rate unit. So we've had a few conversations with them, and they weren't interested in doing a luxury boutique apartment. They just wanted, you know, pretty much a regular apartment building for folks looking for that sort of thing. So the way we do achieve that is often having those bachelor apartments, and that balances how, when they look at whether they can afford to build this or not, that's what it comes down to a lot of the times. Every developer has a different, you know, Excel spreadsheet that they put all their work into to figure out what makes sense for them. But this is usually what I hear from our clients a lot. So I can share that. To address your comment regarding the trees, So we do have a landscape plan prepared by landscape architects. It does identify the tree species in it. So a lot of the trees are, all of the trees and all of the shrubs are identified in the landscape plan. So I can share with you that the 3 proposed on Scott Street are sugar maples, and then pagoda dogwoods, which are, from what I understand, quite native to North America. Those are the 3 trees proposed on Rockhurst, and then a lot of the shrubs planted, proposed to be planted, are native. So we also had some conversations with the owner about this, and they're looking for, trees that are more likely to survive, understanding the tough conditions they go through. So that was all taken into consideration by the landscape architects when they proposed the species. So the goal really is to make sure that they live. And it really comes down to maintenance at the end of the day. So that's usually the number one way to keep those trees alive is proper maintenance. And I think your other comment, just that the bachelor, should be oriented a different way. I think Chris mentioned that we can take a look at that again. But it's also, perhaps worth recognizing that folks who do move into these apartments are part of the community. So even if they are living in a bachelor, they'll become a part of the community, and we can't really speculate on how long they'll stay in the community for, but hopefully they'll become, your neighbors and you'll get to meet them one day.
I would
Yeah,
hope so,
and
but I
just
know
to-
that from experience that the bachelor apartments are sort of transitional housing. So
Heather, if I may, I'm happy to help advocate for, reorienting units, but I do need a basis that is something other than conceptions about the folks who might rent any given housing typology. I live in Hintonburg. We're in R4. I'm surrounded by 1 bedrooms and bachelor apartments, and noise is not an issue, right? And in today's market, at the rate of rentals, there are a lot of people who might be seeking 1 bedrooms who simply cannot afford them at the rates at which the market is providing them, who may be able to afford a smaller bachelor apartment. I don't equate, and I can't go to the planners and equate bachelor apartments with problem tenants. So if there's another basis upon which I can do it, great. But I look forward to having people in bachelor apartments around me as much as families in 2-bedroom apartments.
well, I know that I've had lots of friends who are single moms with kids and stuff, and they really do need, a place, safe place to raise the kids. And when you have people coming and going all the time, they weren't happy. So that's I look at this from the social perspective, from the perspective of all of those people that I've worked with over the years who were single moms who needed a place where they could afford to live. So that is where I'm coming from.
Yeah, unfortunately, in the city right now, far too many people from all demographics and family household sizes are struggling to find housing they can afford. So, okay, I'll leave it there. I've made my point.
Sorry, just jumping in here. I can confirm that the owners of this property are not leasing out for shorter than a year. Leases will be up to a year. So there's no short term. They want people to move into this building and have less people moving out. So the idea is once they move in, they'll like the building, they'll like the neighborhood and stay. They're not planning a market. Their business model is not to have people move in and move out. So we take your point, and I think the reorienting some of those bachelor units and stuff is what we're doing. But I think Chris might be able to comment on where we provided the balconies are probably was thought out with regards to the unit sizes and such, to be able to provide that amenity space for some of those more family sized units. So they do have that balcony. So that plays into it as well. There's a lot of layers and jigging and jagging. So we can look back at it, and I think we'll take that point for sure. And then on the trees, the city, and I'm going to step on John's toes here, but as part of our site plan, we do have to secure for the cost of those trees. And then we do have to make sure that they survive up to, 2 years. We come back, we check the health of them. And if not, the city has held on to a security, which requires us to either replant it or come up with a different plan if for whatever reason, the original plan, due to some obstacle or unforeseen circumstance, can't have that tree survive there. So there is some assurances in the way that we do, the owners will have to post securities during construction to ensure that they follow the plan, as well as the tree securities actually last 2 seasons after the tree is planted to ensure that it does take and it is a healthy tree.
I'll
Thank
just
you. Oh,
I'll just add to that really quick. So yeah, I did circulate to our planning forester on that. So he's provided comments on the appropriateness of the species selected, as well as you know, the amount of soil that's required for these species. So he's looking for that information. So we're definitely on top of that aspect as well.
thank you, Heather, for your question, and Tamara and Chris and John for responding. I see Richard's had his hand up for a couple of minutes. So Richard, do you want to go next?
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yeah, but we can hear you, but the volume is quite low.
Change my volume. Maybe I have to stay closer.
Okay.
Is it any better? Hear me better?
It's a bit better, yeah.
Okay. So I've lived in the community for nearly 40 years. I'm looking at that property right now. First of all, I think this process, I feel like it's a done deal with an AEM. This is the first time I've heard of this project happening. Been aware of that property, having seen it sold. This is the first time hearing of this, and my blood is boiling. I think the bottom line is it's an ugly project. It's an ugly building. It's an ugly design. It's poorly designed. I'm an artist and a designer. There's no imagination in this project in terms of the aesthetics. No awareness of aesthetics at all in this. And I'm appalled at this concept that we're going to be having towers along Scott Street. This is the first I've been. I guess this is the sixth plan, but it's ridiculous. This is a neighborhood. You're talking about transforming, changing this neighborhood. Feels good. It's just, and I just feel a total waste of my time here. It's all done deal. You've already made the plans and worked it through. It's just, there's no consultation or no sensitivity to the community at all. Embrace our kids here. It's just, this is not my vision. And that building is butt up. There's no shortage. Ugly. No imagination at all. It's all. Beyond that, parking. You've got 2 parking spots for 16 units. What about the visitors to that place? Well, you expect everybody just to be walking and riding their bikes and taking the transit? That's ridiculous. That's not reality. That may be the dream. As people are going to be coming visiting, there's going to be a park up and down the street. I'm just so frustrated.
Thank you.
I don't know why I'm finding out now when it's done. Where is the communication of the community? Jeff, I'm disappointed. I appreciate that's not an excuse for us. It's a blight on the landscape. I'd love to hear some response, but tell me about the park. At least address that.
Richard, for the parking minimums in neighborhoods like this were removed, by and large, by a decision of council several years ago. That was the result of a well-consulted, well-publicized public process. The city absolutely considers that people can live in a neighborhood like yours without a car. You are within easy walking distance of pretty much every amenity that anyone could want. And you're on a street that is among the best multimodal transportation in the city. You've got It's right on the main cycling network. It is right on LRT. It's a major arterial road that can handle a significant amount of cars. It is, this is exactly where we want denser development. We've got to fit something like 400,000 new people in Ottawa over the course of the next 20 years. The province tells us it's going to be even more. So that means some parts of the ward are going to get, or some parts of the city are going to get denser. And or the alternative is to spread further out. And spreading further out is an environmental and an economic catastrophe. So if we're going to get denser, where do we want that density to be? We want it to be on streets like Scott Street, because we can't widen all of our roads. We can't accommodate 400,000 people worth of new cars on our streets. We have to facilitate people being able to live without a car. In Ottawa Centre, there is, as of 2016, just a slight majority of people who live in multi-residential housing don't have a car. Now, I absolutely know that for the first couple of years of this building, despite the landlord telling everyone there's no parking, that some people are going to try to move in and they're going to try to park on Rockhurst. They're going to try to park on nearby streets. And then neighbors are going to call when people are parked over time. They're going to get hit with winter parking bans. Right? They're not going to, and have no place to put their car. And then I'm going to get the calls and they say, you got to help me. I got no place to park. I'm like, did your landlord tell you that? Yes, there's nothing I can do to help. And they'll move into one of the thousands of units that are being built with parking spots. There's no reason though to think that you can't fill this small number of units with people who don't have cars. Like, I absolutely get that those of you who are in the small, the fully detached homes, who have, salaries of a certain amount, pensions of a certain amount, you expect that, you'll be able to have a car and you have a private property that allows you to have a car on it. But for many thousands of people in Ottawa, they don't have cars. And increasingly, they can't afford cars. And this is the kind of place where we want those people to be able to live. Because if we stick them in the middle of nowhere in Orleans, they're going to be stuck. Right? They need to be able to live on streets like Scott Street where they can live without a car.
So we're gonna be battling cars for a while.
I expect that some people are going to try to move into this building with cars. Now, I live down the street from a new no car apartment building on Hamilton here in Hintonburg. And we have noticed absolutely there's no parking in front of their building. There's only paid parking. We have not seen the influx of cars on my street that we were wondering if we'd see, right? We expected people to move in there with cars. We're the closest free parking on the street to where that building is. I can't remember, it's like 40 units or something. And we're, the only people I see on the streets are the folks who live on my street who are parking their second cars. I haven't seen it, but I do know that sometimes I get calls from people who move into no parking buildings, who have a car and expect me to be able to help find them a parking spot. So I would expect that on Rockhurst, for a bit, you'll probably see some people try to finagle their way to having a car on Rockhurst and get away with it. But because of I think so. You'll see some.
All right, so just one other more directed, I guess, to you, Jeff. This whole Scott Street thing, this is the beginning of the whole evolution of Scott Street. I'm gonna see this 4 stories, I'm gonna probably see 8 stories the next time. People are gonna push one. So I'm gonna be looking at these towers. This is not legal that I hope to part.
No, it's not, right? And neighborhoods change, right? Again, we need to fit 400,000. Pardon me?
Communities are destroyed by developers.
So destroyed is, if you don't want, if you consider looking at an apartment building destroyed, okay.
Developing, we'll just push the neighborhood out. We leave, because this is the neighborhood we embraced and nurtured for 40 years.
It'll change. It'll change. Many people are still going to love living in their neighborhood, despite the fact that there are 4 stories.
All of this process is to the community. There's no involvement and there's no power. Just feel totally helpless. Developers come in and do what they want. They have rules, and then they just walk all over.
So I do want to make sure that it's understood that all of this is happening within rules. what you don't like are the rules.
Well, the rules keep changing, and without seemingly
So we-
anybody being aware.
Yeah, and I mean, we just went through a very well publicized, lots of press. I put it in my newsletter constantly, official plan process, right? Now, there is only some things over which the city has control, like you're on a more major corridor on Scott Street. On minor corridors like Gladstone, I had actually gotten a motion put forward and passed by council to keep the height to 6 stories. And the province, when they approved our official plan, said, nope, that's actually going to be 9. And they're allowed to do that, right? They're the province and they control planning in the city. So there's only a certain level of control that city council has as well. But yeah, like, and I don't want to get into a long discussion about planning because I see a couple of hands up here, but this was a long, well consulted process to say, yeah, these are the corridors where the official plan is going to start contemplating 9-story buildings. And along Scott, if people start assembling, these folks can't build a 9-story building on this parcel, right? You can't do it. There's no footprint. But if people start to assemble, on some of the bigger corners, you might be able to see 9-story buildings. In behind, over the course of the next 20 years, you're probably going to see buildings going in. Well, sorry, maybe even sooner than that. You're going to start to see 2.5-story buildings, semi-detached buildings, right? That's part of the zoning that is currently being discussed, and which, again, I'd encourage people, make sure you're reading my newsletter, pay attention to what the media is saying. That R1 on Scott Street is not going to last.
All right,
Not as we try to build a city that is sustainable.
I find it disappointing, but ultimately, it's an ugly building. Okay. We got one.
Okay, I see. Thank you, Richard. I see a couple of hands up. We also have a couple of questions in the Q&A. And Don Crockford wrote a question that I'm going to read out. And actually, I think it touches on some of Jeff's comments. So it may have been answered already. But in any event, Don's question is, where did it go? One sec, sorry. If the current zoning allows for 9-story building, can the developer change their mind and go for 9?
Yeah, so the zoning doesn't currently allow for 9 stories. The official plan designation does, and that's subject to transition. So when we think about transition, that's space between the building and the adjacent property. That's sort of a buffer. There's, is the building, does it step back? This building has it's 4 stories. There's not much room for step backs or in the same way a 9-story building would. But if someone wanted to build a 9-story building here, they would most likely buy more property. The Councillor Leeper mentioned this earlier, the building footprint and the site footprint, a 9-story building probably wouldn't make sense. We could look at it and assess it and figure out if we could support it. But at 9 stories, that gets challenging because we would likely be expected to provide transition. And with a building this size, it doesn't make sense financially usually. The costs of providing transition for a 9-story building, it would have to be a lot bigger for it to work. So the building that you're seeing today, 4 stories is probably, we can have some discussions with the client on some of the suggested revisions to the design internally, but 4 stories really makes sense for this site area.
Yeah, just further to that, Tamara, the zoning we're requesting would change this site to be a 4-story site. So later on, if they wanted anything higher than 4 stories, they would have to come back to the table, do a rezoning, and that's where all the issues that Tamara is bringing up about transition would come into play. So right now, the request on the table is to zone this an R4UD zone, which has a height limit of no more than 4 stories. So if this were to go through and be approved, there could be no bait and switch and a 9-story building shows up. They'd have to resubmit for site plan, redo zoning, and it wouldn't work on this one site alone. It would have to be a bigger amalgamation to do that.
Okay, thank you, Tamara and Lisa. Next, we're gonna go to Dana. She's had her hand up for a while, so please go ahead, Dana.
Hi, this is Mike and
Oh,
Dan.
hi, Mike. Hi,
Sorry,
Mike. Hi,
the
Dana.
video's not working. Unfortunately, we'd be happy to show our faces and show you the view from our dining room of 1806 Scott Street. We're the southern property line owners that share the same property line. It's first question though, would be to John, just to make sure I didn't get a reply from you that you received my 3 pages of comments and concerns.
Hi, Michael. Yes, yeah, I did receive it. Sorry for not confirming that.
Perfect. So I don't have to go through all of those this evening. I did have a couple other comments and questions, but just to go back to the parking, you know, there's a 94 unit development called the Mizrahi at the other end of Rockhurst, which is still not completed in its construction. And we presume that there's 1 parking spot per unit. Now it's being touted as Ottawa's most luxurious 5-star condo in the city. So it would be, you know, suffice to suggest that people might have more than 1 car. And they might have visitors, and most likely they will park on Rockhurst Road. And then the current structure at 1806 Scott has
4 units, as you mentioned,
4 units.
and all at market rate.
Currently at market rate with 6, you know,
Vehicles parked in all 6 parking spots at all times, and overflow parking on into the Rockhurst Road on every day of the week.
there's also other rental units on Scott Street that have people parking on Rockhurst Road already. So a severe reduction in parking spots plus an increase in units is going to
Traffic.
increase traffic, increase, you know, congestion on the street. And we know what streets are like in the winter. Plus the movement of the parking spot towards closer to our property line actually reduces parking on the street because you can't park right at the corner of Scott and Rockhurst. So we've been discussing with many residents in the neighborhood. We've had some meetings. There's been lots of discussion. Nobody is overly happy about this.
And I understand the vision of wanting people to, you know, use public transit and that, but that is not the reality of Ottawa, because our public transit system isn't sufficient. Nor will it be when this portion of the LRT is finished sufficient to support people at that level of income, you know, not also having a car. We are also not in an area where to support student housing in terms of, you know, attracting people to those bachelor apartments who may not have a car. It's an interesting choice, you know, of mix of units for the property. We're not against intensification. We love this neighborhood. We want people to enjoy this neighborhood. But what we'd like to see is responsible intensification, and we really truly feel that, you know, what is proposed for that lot, the lot barely supports. And certainly, you know, there will be a negative impact on the neighborhood, not just for a couple years. I think it would be potentially quite longer than that.
Yeah, I mean, the location of the building is 800 meters from either LRT station. It's not like it's within the 300-meter radius to allow 9, 15-story high-rise buildings, right? So you're exactly between the 2 locations. Do you need to have 16 units on that property? Therefore, you're asking for other variances in order to fit the 16-unit building. So do you have any other comments, Dan?
I think I also question the position of the balconies. You have 6 balconies looking directly into our bedrooms.
Yeah, so there's 6 balconies that will be less than 30 feet from our daughter's bedroom and our ensuite bathroom. And that's, you have a 10-meter distance from our building to the south side of that building, but then you have balconies at 1.5 meters depth. So that's less than 30 feet. The balconies technically, according to the bylaw, are supposed to be on the street side, right? Scott Street or Rockhurst. but you can't put them on rockers because there's a hydro line there. So you have a choice of either recessing the building further back off Rockhurst to allow the balconies there.
Or moving the balconies to the backyard, which then, you know, unfortunately are significantly impeding our privacy. And we would really recommend that, you know, those balconies be rethought.
Yeah, because if you look at any of the other developments well, there are no other developments of this nature in Wellington Village defined by the river, Wellington, Highland Park, and Holland. So you have to go outside of Wellington Village to Westboro and Hintonburg, Mechanicsville. Both zones have been traditionally mixed use, right? Commercial and residential, whereas Wellington Village is strictly residential, other than the metro and 2 places of worship. If you look at other low-rise apartment buildings, they're all 11 meters tall with no balconies at the back property. The balconies are on the street facing side. So we would request that the balconies be on the street facing side of this building. Never mind that the building is almost 50 feet tall, 48 and change, with no articulation. So it looks like a box. And no disrespect to the architectural design, but it's strikingly similar to the Amazon building at Fallowfield in 416. Another point I would like to ask, maybe someone can comment on, is that the proportionate width of the abutting right of way, which would now be Rockhurst Road, the building has to be proportionate to the width of the right of way. So the right of way, which is Rockhurst Road, is 10 meters. So proportionally, the building should be 10 meters tall, which means you could zone it for an R4A or an R4B 11-meter tall building, not 14 and a half plus a sloped parapet on the top, making it over 15 meters tall. Then another point is that the City of Ottawa, Christopher Moyes, is working on developing and about to release the City of Ottawa guidelines for the low-rise infill development guidelines, and those are due to come out mid-May. So it would be remiss to allow this design to go ahead before those guidelines were, finalized and made public. Then one more point is there's the official city plan. This is a lot of information. I've spent a lot of time, unfortunately, having to learn about stuff. I'm a pharmacist, not an engineer or an architect. And a lot of people on the call aren't aware of all of this information, and that's, I think I can, empathize with Richard and how upset he is just with the whole process. But there's also something called the Scott Street Secondary Plan in the city's official plan, and that defines an area, unfortunately not this specific area, but just east of us. And so I guess the question is why is our area not included in the Scott Street Secondary Plan, which includes most of Wellington Village? Is that just an oversight, or was that on purpose? Because this area and this specific property sits in a very unique little snippet of land of irregular lots, small lots, right next to the NCC zoned Island Park Drive. So has consideration been made into that as to why this area is not part of the Scott Street Secondary Plan? And then I guess one final comment would be that the bachelor units proposed in the building are of the smallest square foot compared to any of the other buildings in the area that I can find when doing research. And I guess the question is, who are you catering to? There's no colleges, universities nearby. You're almost 1 kilometer from each LRT station, and you're proposing the smallest square foot bachelors out of any building in the area. I think I'll leave it at that for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Dana and Mike. I know there's a lot to unpack there. And I don't know if the panel will be able to respond to everything tonight. I know that Mike, you sent your submission into John, which is very helpful. But would the panel like to try and hit a couple of those points?
The one that sticks to my head is the last one with regards to the size of the bachelors. And for us, we look at it as we're the planning consultants, we're not the market experts. And if they're creating units that are not sized appropriately and they don't think people will rent them, that's going to be on them. So at the end of the day, we have to trust that what our clients are asking for is something that can be rented. As to who their market is, unsure. They could be people that don't spend as much time at home and are more out in the community, younger professionals, how they get around, whether it's bike, LRT, and it's not just LRT, there is a bus route that is connecting along Scott that's quite frequent. So they're taking advantage of that. The parking spaces, I know it's come up, is those 2 spaces are actually visitor spaces. So there is no, when someone does rent in this building there, it's not like there's a small slimmer, a glimpse of hope that they will get a parking spot. Those spots are pretty much going to be used for pickup, drop off visitors. So Amazon, Uber Eats, whoever needs to pull off, they have a spot to do that. So they're not putting on hazards right at the corner. And that was something we decided to put in to allow for that sort of nuance to happen. Trying to remember some of the other comments. The balconies is something we will take back. Balconies we added to add a little bit of articulation and interest to the building. The amenity requirements are done through the ground floor on the level, so they're not actually a requirement. Could they become Juliet balconies? Could they be looked at as from a different eliminating them all together? That is a possibility. But we are trying to accommodate some additional space for people to have outside versus just in their units. But that's something we can definitely take back. We have urban design comments from the city, as John indicated, from their team that'll have comments on the articulation, balcony placements, door placements, windows, and all of that. So once we get all that in, by no means is this a done deal. We haven't received our first round of comments. The comments coming in today will help shape this building. Will it drastically change? Probably not. This will be a low-rise building with a couple of, could the numbers fluctuate in unit sizes? Potentially. Could balconies be moved around? Potentially. So we're here to listen and look forward to getting the comments through John so we can answer in a more wholesome way and bring this to our clients to have them understand. They want to make sure that the building that they're going to be building is welcomed in the community. They don't want to be ostracized. They're not intending to come in here and blow up a community. They're building it here because they think it's a good community and they want to be part of it. So with that, unless somebody else wants to comment on those questions, if not, we'll just do it through the formal resubmission once John summarizes and provides us those comments.
I'll just add regarding the urban designer. So actually, funny enough, Christopher Moyse is the assigned urban designer to this file. So he will be looking at this through the lens of the incoming urban design guidelines. Obviously, he can't necessarily point to them, but he will be sort of just reviewing it in that sort of light. And then to the point of, it's been made a few times regarding the distance to the LRT and bus rapid transit system, or at least the stations. 800 meters or 700 meters is considered to be walkable within the sort of 15-minute neighborhood sort of definition. especially when it comes to sort of higher order transit, such as an LRT system. So 800 meters is actually quite close for a system like that. I know there's one coming in the next couple of years, about a kilometer or 1,200 meters from my house, and I would consider that to be walkable. Of course, I'm able-bodied, but under the definition, it is a reasonable distance.
I think it's also worth considering, just to add on to that conversation, is that one of the reasons that developers look at this site, not just our clients right now, but in general, they're looking at these sites near transit because that's how you attract potential tenants. So this is a selling feature, and there's a lot of buildings being built in Ottawa right now. Some of them do have parking, and some of them some are being proposed with no parking. A future tenant will choose their apartment based on what they need. So this is someone who's interested in a low-rise apartment building might choose this because it has a lot of those amenities that they want, and they want to live in the community. And I've lived in low-rise apartment buildings that had less amenities than this. We didn't have an elevator. So every day you went up the stairs. So there's, when we look at these sites, the Mizrahi development was mentioned. That's a condo targeted as luxury condos. Just hearing from some of my other clients, they tend to target higher parking rates. And because this is a rental, our clients would be looking, when they rent to someone, that person looking to rent it would understand that and choose to rent here. That's been mentioned a couple times, but I think it's important to sort of put everything together. The people are attracted to the cycling community, the proximity to the river, the LRT proximity, the buses for maybe if you're not able-bodied, you might need to take that bus to connect to LRT. These are all things that bring people to the community, and that's why developers pick these sites and why they're interested in redeveloping them, because they're attractive to potential tenants.
Okay, thank you all for responding to that. Just in the interest of time, I want us to try and get as many questions in as we can. And I see Jen has had her hand up for quite a while. Jen, do you want to ask your questions?
Hey, gang. I don't know. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah, I apologize for the goofy ears, the earphones, but first I want to thank everyone for a very thorough presentation and your patience and thick skin, because I know it's not easy when people are upset about stuff. And, everybody's raising some very valuable points, but living here, and Jeff lives here, Councillor Leeper lives here as well. We know that the parking thing, I hear what is being said about mass transportation, but my experience has been that even build it and they will come, it's not necessarily true, as we've seen with the number of ridership after the light rail, regardless of any of the challenges that they faced. I'm not sure that Ottawa is at that place yet. Now, Councillor Leeper shared with us that some studies had been done, and I trust and believe that all these studies are done. But if you look at some of the major cities like New York City, where of course your only option is to use public transportation or cabs, they make taxi cabs extremely expensive. I just think right now there may need to be a few steps in between before we start adding an insane amount of intensification. Now, just to say insane, we're talking about one building right now. But when you look at that, it's down from another development that's has yet to feel the impact on the community because it hasn't been completed. I too worry about parking becoming an issue. So I live, my name's Jen Gillespie, I'm with the Island Park Community Association. And I know that many times it makes a difference in our lives. People just don't come and hang out at our parties and come and visit our homes because parking's a nightmare. And while we're making it easy for people with public transportation, I just don't know that it's there yet with the trust factor of the public. And not everybody is a cyclist, as lovely as it is, and as much as past US ambassadors have been very impressed with how accessible Ottawa is for enjoying the outdoors and a healthy lifestyle. I just don't know that Ottawa is at a point to continue intensification when it has yet to be proven that mass transportation is successful. So And I just want to do a shout out to Heather. I believe that that's Heather Pearl, who is an extraordinary horticulturist. And gosh, that lady knows her stuff. But yeah, I just wanted to toss that out there. I don't know if there's any plans for, you may hate this idea, a parking garage, which they do in the larger cities when they have high rises that don't have enough parking. It's not only just about the people who live in that building. I believe Robert, Dana, and others have raised the issue that, you know, people come in to visit us, and now people are coming in to visit us here because maybe there's an event going on downtown. Well, they have to park their car somewhere, and to get here, that means they're going to have to, you know, take public transportation or Uber or whatever. I just don't know that the parking thing has been really well thought out. I do see it as being an issue. But anyways, I just thought I'd toss that out there. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Jen. So I think we're going to take a question from the chat now. One question from Scott Burton. Would the 2 parking spots have EV chargers or the electrical capacity to add them in the future?
We can certainly take that back to the development team. I know that we had been envisioning this as some sort of visitor parking, so the usefulness of EV charging for visitor parking might not really be there, but if we do hear feedback, you know, we're receiving a lot of feedback, so if this does become more of a resident parking space, we could definitely consider that, but just recognizing that if this is for visitors only, I don't think it would necessarily make the most sense for EV charging if you're not expecting to be parked there that long to charge your car, but yeah, we can take that back.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Okay, we'll take another question from the chat. Janet, it looks like you had a question about the unit mix. You're still there? Okay.
Yeah, hi. This is Janet.
Okay, hi.
Hi, yes, first of all, I just wanted to say, you know, I appreciated Jeff's comments at the very beginning of this session. I support adding diversity to the neighborhood. I've lived here for over 20 years. I would never be able to move into this neighborhood now. And I worry about where my kids and where a lot of people that Jeff's talking about are coming to the city or living in the city or needing housing. So I guess at the outset, I just want to say I'm welcoming of diversity in the housing opportunities in our neighborhood. I think it adds to our neighborhood, makes it stronger. So I do support seeing this. I do support intensification. I do support the it being in the right place. So I just want to say that at the outset. I also do understand the privacy concerns and things that have been raised. So I do think there are design considerations and things that do need to be looked at for the immediate neighbors. But I am a close neighbor around the corner and I do support this. My question was, well, I did have a question about the accessibility. I appreciate that there's a number of accessible units, but has any consideration big? I give a lot of consideration to bicycle storage, but to scooter and mobility device storage. And I'm also wondering about the design of the building in terms of if people with mobility and accessibility needs, if it's got universal design features or features that allow it to be easy for somebody with mobility issues to live in this building, because I think that that's is an absolute need. So that was, and I think that just want to reiterate, I think a lot of comments around, I think there are some tweaks that could be done to preserve people's privacy. That is a concern. But again, I do welcome the diversity in our neighborhood and diverse of rental and having those options for people to come to this neighborhood.
Okay, thank you. Tamara or Chris, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, I had a little trouble hearing, to be honest, but yeah, certainly there was a question about the accessibility. So the building itself, well, first of all, the Ontario Building Codes, standards for accessibility are pretty minimal. So it's not that hard to achieve them. And we've certainly achieved them, and we've gone above and beyond in some instances. So You'll notice, for example, that some of the bathrooms are large enough to meet AODA standards, which is a bit more onerous and basically offers more space. So these will be superior units over and above building code minimums. I think that the scooter storage, it's a really good point. We hadn't actually allocated space for that, but maybe we can. And I don't know, I can't really remember what else was noted, but hopefully I've covered the architectural aspects. If not, please, somebody can remind me.
Yeah, there was here, I was just thinking I should share my screen so that we can see the accessible units a bit better, just to highlight some of what you were saying. So I'll put that up on the screen. And one of the other questions that Janet had was just some concerns with tweaks to privacy. So I heard scooter parking and how is the design accessible? So maybe explain a bit more on the accessibility, like how it is accessible. What does that mean?
No, certainly. I mean, so it has an elevator, which is which by law has to be large enough for accessibility reasons. So if we actually move to the previous slide, so we can see the ground floor. Exactly. So so there, you'll notice on the plans that there are faint circles and rectangles, and these elements allow us to ensure that we're providing the right clearances where they have to be. And if I, for instance, direct you to the washroom, the top unit. So yes, exactly. Thanks, Tamara. So that transfer space next to the toilet is rectangle. This isn't technically required by the building code. So we're doing things that are over and above. And
yeah, I understand the building code does not. Yeah, totally.
Yeah, it's pretty minimal. So
yeah,
we're making efforts that we would not normally have to make necessarily, but we just think that it's a good move, increases rentability. So yeah, I'm quite confident that we've done a lot to address accessibility. The overlooks, yeah, I mean, again, as Lisa had indicated, it's something that we can go and review with our client and see, if there's things that they'd be willing to look at changing, and quite possibly there might be. So we can look at it. And since I'm speaking, there was a lot of comments about the architecture. That's always a tough one. I mean, we can't. There's no architecture that's going to make everybody happy. We did choose to do sort of a more playful, modern design. There's few ways that you can actually generate some interest in articulation in a relatively, boxy mass. Somebody pointed that out. That's fair. I mean, but that's what it is. That's what the site allows us to do, and we've sort of hit all of the functional requirements that we need in terms of circulation and laying out suites in a functional way. That is what we end up with on a site that's relatively compact as this one. So that's what we chose to do architecturally, and it's possible that another client, another architect might be interested in something a bit more traditional, but I would find that a difficult way to approach this with any success, given the mass that we have. So that's why we did the move that we did. And I understand not everybody's going to be happy with that architecture, but that's something that the client is quite pleased with. So I'll leave it there.
Okay. Thank you, Chris and Tamara. I'm just going to go back to the Q&A, and I see that there are a couple of comments. They're not questions. They're anonymous. Well, Westboro 310. That's the name. I'll just read their comments. Says, I support many of Richard's points. I think that Jeff and Foten are tone deaf and condescending to residents who will be negatively affected by this unattractive development. bear in mind that the south end of Scott, the Mizrahi development, has not been occupied yet. It is not at all clear from this discussion what options are left for residents who do not agree with this development, size, character, nature of occupancy, transitional/high turnover. And also says strong support of Michael and Dana's points. I see.
Sorry,
Just-
Alice,
so-
I don't
yes.
remember, had John outlined the appeals process?
I did touch on it briefly, yes.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of just, you know, the high level of where this is that the developer is making an argument to the city planner that the zoning they're looking for meets with all the policies that guide development in the city of Ottawa. The planner will then make a recommendation to city council, who have to vote. So the immediate first job for those who oppose this development is to try to convince John to recommend refusal of this or make a recommendation to planning committee and council to refuse this. So that's you know, you delve into the policies and the plans that the city has that are intended to guide. The next level is to try to convince me and the politicians to vote against it if John does recommend that we approve it. So we vote on that recommendation. If the politicians on committee and council wind up approving the rezoning that is being sought, then residents can go to the Ontario Land Tribunal, which is the provincial body that is appointed to hear appeals of municipal planning decisions. It's a fairly big step, and even though I don't personally oppose this building, I am more than happy to walk you through what that entails and how you're likely to be successful. Generally, it does involve, though, the expense of a planning lawyer, and I will give you my blunt advice as to whether or not you're likely to succeed. It's an expensive undertaking, but sometimes residents do succeed with those. So I'm happy to take that discussion offline in terms of where the decision points are and what the arguments are that you need to make in order to be successful in those. I'll leave it there. Thanks, Alice.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, I see Jen, you've I know you have your hands up, but I also see you've submitted a question in the chat. I'll read it out. It says, it's also worthy of note that current schools have exceeded space and impervious usage and are beyond capacity. The city's intensification appears to have a build, then see what services are needed approach. How does the city plan to provide school space for the added density? There appears to be no mention of any plan to add school capacity to meet the growing density.
I think I hit my button before John, but I know what he might say. Part of the circulation is to the school boards whenever an application does go in. So the school boards are notified that there is a request to intensify a certain site or make changes. And if there is concerns or comments, the school boards themselves do have the opportunity to comment and make their issues known. In more built up areas like this, and it's a different comment usually than what we see in the suburban areas where they're like, we have set aside school sites to build new schools. In the sort of more urbanized areas, it is coming down to what's currently available in the intensification that's coming. Typically it is sort of cyclical. You have people that have been in the community for 40 years who kids have grown up through the school system and they're leaving. And in some cases you're seeing schools actually with lower numbers because the families aren't there anymore. The young families can't get into the communities. And so you actually have the opposite of what's being talked about here. But all that to say is that if there was a concern with this project, and we would be hearing from the school boards directly to either put clauses in title to sort of say that accommodation problems exist and kids are being housed in portables. So we do get comments through the circulation process from the school boards, all 4 of them.
Thank you, Lisa. Dana and Mike, I see, is that your hand up again with another question?
Yes, it is. Just
go ahead.
another comment. So yeah, I think the general consensus from the community and my neighbors is that this building is a stark mass. There is no articulation. And from the official plan or the new official plan, it clearly states that any proposed low-rise infill buildings need to achieve a good fit into an existing neighborhood, respecting its character and its architectural and landscape heritage. I think, you know, from feedback from the residents who live here, and some have lived here for multiple decades, the design just isn't meeting that requirement. Thanks.
Yeah, again, I mean, I'm not going to be changing anybody's mind who's already decided that they don't like it. That's pretty normal in these kinds of meetings. Some people will like it. Generally, those people don't show up. Others are within the rights to dislike it, but certainly there's, you know, it's all about interpretation. So it doesn't have to mimic the neighboring architectural language in terms of forms and shapes. I mean, we can do it with materials, and we've done so. There's wood in the neighborhood, lots of wood cladding. So we've done this, and you know, there's other ways that it can be done. And so it's not necessarily going to look like you know, an arts and crafts building. So yeah, so once again, I'm sorry if it's not going to you know, be to your taste, but certainly the client likes it, and we can make
Well,
arguments.
thank you. Thank you for your response. And you describe it as a modern, fun, playful building, and our building beside you is a modern building, even though it was designed by one of Ottawa's, you know, architects that did lots of work in the glebe, and this was his last design building before he retired. But there's also, you're asking for an R4UD with several variances. So the variances include articulation, fenestration, and lack of space. So unfortunately, it appears as a stark mass. And that's the concern, primary concern of the neighbors. The views of Gatineau Hills, Gatineau Park, are blocked for several neighbors to the south, obviously ours as well. And of course, the privacy issue is going to stare into 11 backyards on count.
Yeah, point taken. But again, there's, you know, I'm not going to be changing anybody's mind here. So, you know, we'll look at that. We'll review it with our client, but, you know, I don't think things like that are going to change.
Sorry, I'll just add that the applicant team doesn't have the benefit of entering this meeting with any of the first round of comments. So as I mentioned, Christopher Moyse is assigned to this application and has reviewed it, and will be providing comments on things that you have mentioned. Not necessarily, we don't get into the, you know, minutia of the design, especially if there's no sort of secondary plan that provides a direct, you know, some direction in that regard. But we do, you know, we will have comments regarding the massing, and it will kick off a discussion between us and the applicant team to sort of refine that that building.
Yeah, and it's also perhaps worth noting that we will be receiving comments from a lot of departments and external agencies as well. So a lot of the work we're going to be doing is balancing those comments, taking them in and deciding, you know, how do we respond to all of them? Because often we receive pages of comments, and sometimes they conflict. Sometimes urban design has one opinion, parks has another opinion, and they do not agree. So we have to do a lot of work to take that in and respond to that and revise the design. So I think one of the things that a lot of projects frankly struggle with is the privacy versus amenity discussion. Those balconies are something we'll be looking at. And it's something that every project has to take into really careful consideration, is how do you protect the privacy for existing residents? Then how do you also provide a livable, hospitable place for future residents? So you're balancing future and existing tenants. You're also balancing privacy and amenity space and access to green space. So, and then we'll also continue to balance how much parking is enough parking, how much is too much parking. So it really is a balancing act. And at the end of the day, this is a pretty comparably small project compared to what a lot of the files that we can see. So this is a 16 unit building. And we're going to try and take all of that in, but there's also only so much we can take in. You know, larger projects sometimes have the ability to provide more parking, to provide parking garages, and to provide underground parking. This site footprint's just too small for that. So we're really going to be doing our best to take the feedback we've received and create a really livable product for not only the people who live in the neighborhood, but those future residents who are really eager to move in, but maybe can't afford it yet or just haven't found the right spot.
Yeah, just one more point. I guess that is the point, and that's the point of the neighborhood, is that maybe it should be a smaller project, you know, not a 16-unit, 50-foot tall building, you know, that fits more into the neighborhood, into the character of the neighborhood, and into actually the size of the lot, instead of having to ask for multiple variances.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's worth considering keeping in mind that a lot of the amendments to the zoning bylaw we're proposing are a consequence of how the zoning bylaw is just written. It's really trying to refine and make sure that the design is the best it can be. So when you look at what we're asking to amend, a lot of them are really just trying to make the best building that we can. So just because the front yard is defined as Rockhurst doesn't mean that necessarily makes the most sense. So the building's been designed in a way that tries to respond to the neighborhood, and not only the existing neighborhood, but the evolving neighborhood too. So we're responding to those official plan policies that direct height to Main Street corridors like Scott Street. So to a certain degree, we're trying to fit into the neighborhood, but it's also, we're thinking about how the neighborhood will continue to evolve and what this will be fitting into the future neighborhood. So it's maybe a bit too big picture, but I take your point that it feels a lot larger than what is there. And that's probably, you're going to see the neighborhood continue to evolve and change. And that's the direction we've taken from the official plan, and others will too. I'll just end it there.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you both. I'm just looking at the time. It's 8:45, and we do have a few more comments and questions in the chat that I'm going to read 2 comments, and then I see a question. So I have a comment here. Anonymous says, I agree strongly with Michael's point that the design does not fit the character of the neighborhood. I am concerned about the precedent that this building would set in this location. I'm concerned too about the dismissive tone of many of the responses to the questions. Another comment, with that sort of response, quote, the client likes it, does not give any confidence that input is being taken seriously. Okay, Frank has a question that I'll read out. Does the city plan on reducing the high taxes to compensate for the reduced property values for all the homes adjacent to this new development? Nobody wants to be looking at a 4-story building, whether they like the design or not. This will affect the resale value of not just the nearby homes to this development, but everyone else along Scott who will be selling their homes in the future. Any future buyer of any home adjacent to a Scott Street home will now know they will likely be facing a 4-story and likely higher, as the next developer will surely try to go higher.
I think I can just weigh in quickly here to say, if your property value goes down, your taxes will go down. Your taxes are a direct function of the value. But we also know that property values along Scott Street and in the neighborhood behind are only going to increase. This building will go in, and there are it will still be, the neighborhood behind will still be an extraordinarily attractive neighborhood for people to want to move into. Along Scott Street itself, there is the potential that someone may want to try putting in a 9-story building as contemplated by the official plan at some point, but they would need to assemble a significant number of properties in order to be able to do that. So, and then past 9, then you start to get into an official plan amendment, which is a high bar, which is going to be difficult, given that we've just passed this new official plan. It's going to be difficult for anyone to get more than 9 stories along this stretch, particularly if you are sort of between the two transit stations. So I'm not particularly worried about this stretch going much higher than 4, 6, maybe 9 if someone is able to assemble the right properties. But your property values are not going to go down. I am convinced. Again, there are a lot of people who want to be able to move into this neighborhood, who don't necessarily mind the fact that on a really big main street like Scott, there is what I think a lot of people would expect, a low-rise apartment building. People move into the streets in Westboro all the time with the mid-rises that are going in at 6 stories. It's a function not necessarily of the built form around you. I believe it's a function of the tight-knitness of the neighborhood. I believe it's a function of the amenities that are available, the stores, the recreation, the transit options, the cycling options. You are, you folks are 15 minutes, 12 minutes away from Westboro Beach by bike. It is an extraordinarily attractive place to live. And I think as you sell your homes, even if there are 4-story apartment buildings on Scott Street, I anticipate that you're going to be able to command some pretty impressive prices.
Thank you, Jeff. I understand, I think Patricia has a question.
Hi, thanks so much for taking my question. I really am disappointed and saddened by the kind of disrespect that the architecture and the planners have towards the community by proposing this box on Scott Street. Could the architecture not actually have a little bit more flexibility and maybe put a little curve or maybe something a little bit more interesting that might fit into the neighborhood? Could you not think of maybe putting the balconies on Scott Street and the main entrance and the main garbage disposal on Scott Street as to not infringe totally on the other people in the community, especially the neighbors that are close by? What about the children? They're all going to be impacted by all the new cars that are going to be stuck on the street. They're not going to be anywhere to play. They're not going to be anywhere to feel safe. Yeah, it's a really nice neighborhood, but you know what? People are not happy. They're really disappointed. They don't feel heard. They feel totally disrespected. And I mean, I'm really, really saddened. There's such history in that neighborhood. It's a lovely little neighborhood, but you know, it's being destroyed. Yes, I know we need infill. And I know there's a zillion condos and apartment buildings on Parkdale and on the western part of Scott Street. But this little spot, this is new. This is going to really impact so many houses, so many community members. And it's the beginning. This is going to be the beginning of yet the end of another section of Westboro. So my comment is shameful that so many people want to make so much money out of this little wee parcel of land. Thank you for your time with this horrible development.
Patricia, I'll just say quickly, and I know I'm the bad guy here this evening for
Yes, Jeff, Jeff, you are the bad guy here this evening. I'm sorry.
Yep. No, that's understood. I just want to reiterate what I started the evening with, which is with respect to some of those tweaks, where the balconies are, things like unit mix, the architecture. Those are the areas where I'm looking forward to, pressing the development to better conform to what people are asking for. I can't push back at a 4-story apartment building on Scott Street, but the actual design
yes, I
is
think
something.
You can, Jeff. I think you can.
Okay, but the actual design is something that I can have some influence over.
Well, we'd appreciate that if you do have some influence. And as far as the trees go, my trees on Scott Street have been nurtured by lots and lots of energy and soil and water. And unless they plan on doing that at that structure, they're going to die. So please, if maybe you have some expectation and guarantee that they will follow through with having some of those trees survive, that would be much appreciated.
Heard and understood.
Thank you.
Okay, I don't think I'm seeing any more questions. But I'll just wait a few seconds, see if there are any more hands going up or. Okay, I see, Bill Yan, would you like to ask a
Yeah.
question?
Hey, thanks so much, guys. One of the newer residents on this in this community, and I just had a question regarding this development. I know many of my neighbors have shared concerns with John. I guess for me, I know it sounds like the decision hinges on first on your approval of this development. What red lines have to be crossed for you to decline this development? How many people have you have to hear from for you to say this is not a good idea?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be. I'm not one to provide a decision. I'm more or less making a recommendation based on the policy context that's in place and the rationale provided to support the development. So it's not necessarily, or it's not a numbers, like there wouldn't be a number of citizens that would reach out to me with concerns. It would be trying to address some of the issues that are raised throughout the process to try to come up with a better design, a better project, and to you know, address some of the problems that you may have. We're not trying to figure a way on how to stop a development unless it's completely inconsistent with the applicable policies, which the councillor had mentioned. You know, just on the face of it, it seems to be, you know, more or less consistent with some of these new directions that we have in place in the new official plan. So to, I guess, answer your point or your question, no, it's not a number of commenters. It's about going through the comments and trying to come up with a solution.
Thank you for your comment. And I just would also like to add that I know coming into this meeting that the developers have their own bias, but I was hoping that our counselor, you know, would be on our side. And I was a little bit disheartened to hear in the beginning that you seem to be on the side of the developers.
Yeah, no, I get that. I have tried objectively to find some planning grounds upon which I can object to this. And it's a 2-hour conversation that I have with people, and I'm not going to, you know, necessarily delve into it tonight. But land use planning is only partly a political discussion. Landowners are allowed to ask for rezonings, and then those rezonings are looked at through the lens of all the applicable plans and policies that guide planning in Ontario. And I can't find any grounds upon which to do much more than argue for tweaks to this in the provincial policy statement, and the official plan. So I would love to say, yeah, I'll fight it, but I would essentially be, I'm trying to find the best way to put it. I would be arguing, I wouldn't be arguing good policy, right? Like my fights against buildings, and I fight a lot of them, and I have a reputation in some circles as being in the pockets of developers, and in the opinion of many others that I am a NIMBY and fight everything. I fight a lot of things, but generally what I'm fighting is developments that don't adhere to our official plans and our secondary plans in some important way. And if it doesn't, yes, I will absolutely fight it. But it's not a political choice that, you know, a certain number of residents who want to fight a development, I'm like, okay, let's fight it. I have to have grounds upon which to fight it. And I don't in this case. There is, you know, I can certainly press for better design. I can press for a reconfiguration of the balconies, but there is no grounds upon which I can fight this and vote against it in light of the plans and policies that are supposed to be the guide for city councillors when they vote on developments. It's not a referendum, right? And I think this is one of the hard and most frustrating things for residents, is that when they don't like something, They want politicians to they want the politicians to make political decisions. If City Council were to refuse this on the basis of something, and it went to the Ontario Land Tribunal, the tribunal would overturn us in a heartbeat, right? There's just no policy that guides development in Ontario that speaks to refusing this building. And that's a tough one. I sometimes wonder why city councilors are asked to vote on some of these things, because the planning law is generally so black and white. What I fight are when developers are pushing beyond the bounds of what the official plan allows and what the other plans allow. And sometimes I win and sometimes I lose. But I just can't fight every development that people don't like, because I'm also cognizant that taxpayers and the environment cannot sustain a city that is characterized by low-rise density. Right, we just can't afford it as taxpayers, and the climate impacts of that. So our neighborhoods are going to have to change in order to be a sustainable city. This is the zoning that is in place. Alice and I were trying to figure out when that R1 zoning went into place. And it's probably been that way for 40 years. And it's just no longer in alignment with our official plan. It's no longer in alignment with our provincial policy statement. And there are some developments on which I simply have to do the principled thing and say, this is what City Council wants, even if that's politically unpopular. You know, if someone has a good planning rationale for me as to why this should be rejected, that would be something that would stand up in a hypothetical Ontario Land Tribunal appeal. Great, I'm all ears, but I do not see the planning grounds upon which I can make a principled opposition to this one.
Bullshit.
Okay, thank you. I just see one, I think it's probably going to be our final comment or question for the night. I don't see any other hands, so I'll just read this last one. Thank you, Patricia, for your comments regarding the concern about increased cars and traffic and the question as to where will the children play. A comment that hasn't been made this evening is that this particular part of the neighborhood does not have a park area. So the traffic issue is an especially important one.
Yeah, parks are an issue around the ward. The only thing I would say on that is it's not optimal, but at Tunney's Pasture, there will be a very large new park built, but it does mean crossing the street, which is not optimal. I've just bought authorized the city to purchase the property from our cash in lieu of parkland money at Spencer and Huron, but obviously that's at the other end of the neighborhood. I would love to see if at some point we can get another parcel that is closer to Island Park Drive, so that you don't have to cross Scott Street to get to the big new park that's going to go in at Tunney's. It's a consideration for sure.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Jeff. Thanks, everyone. I am looking at the time. It's actually 9 on the dot, and I'm not seeing any more questions. One last, actually, it's just a comment from Heather Pearl. Says to see what Jeff is talking about. I think she's referring to what when Jeff was referring to the official plan. She says to see what Jeff is talking about, I recommend that people look at Engage Ottawa new official plan. That is what is in effect. So I think that's the final comment for tonight. I just want to thank everyone, the applicants, the team, and John Bernier for your presentations tonight. Of course, I'd like to thank all the residents for taking the time to attend our open house tonight and providing all your comments and questions. We would encourage anyone here to write in their comments to John Bernier as the lead planner on file. And like John provided his email earlier, in the presentation. I'll just say it again, though. It's john.bernier@ottawa.ca. And you can also reach out to our office. Actually, it would be great if you could CC us on those comments too. And just a small reminder that we will have the recording up for this meeting in the coming days on the Kitchissippi Ward YouTube. And if you do have any trouble finding the link for it, or if a neighbor of yours is not here tonight and would like to see it, we are happy to share the link. And you can reach out to us at jeff.leapier@ottawa.ca. And of course, if there are any other questions you might have, please feel free to email us at that address too. We will get your emails and comments. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much, everyone.
yeah.
Have a good night.
Have a good
Thank
night.
you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thanks.
Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.